Hey guys, well, we're going to read another text today and have some questions on it. This text is called The 3 Month War. Remember, we learned in our lesson yesterday that neither one of the sides thought the war would last very long. They both thought they would beat the other side quickly. And so a 3 month war, not hardly. It's going to take years to end the Civil War. Let's look at this caption here of this picture. What is going on? About 200,000 people gathered for a pro-union rally. Even back then, they had rallies and people gathering together. A few days after Fort Sumter fell, it was at that time by far the largest gathering in American history. So all of these people, it's kind of hard to see, but all of these people right here are gathering to support the United States, the American flag here, saying these other states should not secede. They should stick to the United States. What are they thinking? Well, let's read this text and get into some more information. Part of it's a review from yesterday with a few new items to learn as well. So let's read this together. You'll have some questions. This text will be on your questions today, so you can use it as a resource. Here we go. Most of the 75,000 volunteers who joined the U.S. Army after the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter agreed to 3-month enlistments. They agreed to be in the Army for 3 months. And no more. So these 75,000 volunteers, remember Abraham Lincoln, after they fired him Fort Sumter and took that fort from the U.S. Army, remember he called for 75,000 men to volunteer? Well, they did, but they only volunteered for 3 months. Maybe that's why this is called the 3-month war. Lincoln asked for 3-month enlistments because he thought it would only take that long to put down the rebellion. After all, that's how long he had served when he was a member of the Illinois militia during the Black Hawk War, and I covered it up, in 1832. Lincoln wasn't the only man who felt this way. Many newspapers in both the North and the South predicted that the war wouldn't last too long. Defending his own soil and institutions, one true Southern man can chase a dozen Yankees. Remember, Yankee was a nickname for the North, said a newspaper published in Nashville by the Southern Methodist Church. Not everyone agreed that the war would be short. When U.S. Army officer William T. Sherman heard that Lincoln had called up 75,000 troops on 3-month enlistments, he said there was no way that this would be enough. You might as well attempt to put out the flames of a burning house with a squirt gun, Sherman said. So he didn't think it was enough. He thought he needed a lot more firepower to stop the Southern Rebellion. We're going to talk about the border states again. Remember, those states that were right on the border. They didn't want to leave the Union, but they also didn't want to give up slavery. By May 1861, 11 states had seceded. President Lincoln did everything to make sure the number didn't go any higher and that none of the border states left the Union as well. Border states were states such as Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri, which had slavery but didn't join the Confederacy. Lincoln worried a lot about Kentucky. It was, after all, both his and Jefferson Davis's native state. Kentucky bordered the Ohio River and several northern states such as Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. When it came to Kentucky, Lincoln treated the situation delicately. He told Kentucky that he wouldn't try to free its slaves. He also sent weapons to pro-Union militias in Kentucky. Lincoln was probably more concerned about Maryland than Kentucky. Maryland, which is, and I'll read it on in a minute, but here we see that same picture that was in our book. Remember the Anaconda Plan? They were going to squeeze the South, squeeze the borders, not let any ships get out of the ports. So let me finish the sentence. Lincoln was probably more concerned about Maryland than Kentucky. Maryland, which is north of Washington, D.C., was a slave state. Lincoln knew that if Maryland seceded, Washington, D.C. would be surrounded by enemy territory. So think about this. Maryland appear in yellow, a border state, and Washington, D.C. is right here on the border between Virginia and Maryland. So Maryland would be north of Washington, D.C. And if they became a slave state, then Washington, D.C. would be surrounded by slave states. That would be a pretty bad thing. To make sure Maryland didn't leave the Union, Lincoln had the U.S. Army arrest one of Maryland's U.S. congressmen, a third of the state's legislature, and the mayor of Baltimore, and put them all in jail without a trial. This was a violation of the separation of powers spelled out in the U.S. Constitution. Lincoln did it because he thought it was an emergency. Can you imagine that? He was so concerned that the leadership in Maryland, the mayor of Baltimore, and the congressmen and their state legislature, just so that they couldn't decide to join the Confederacy, Abraham Lincoln had them arrested and put in jail. Well, there's one thing about Abraham Lincoln maybe you didn't know, maybe not a good thing. He did it to help the Union, but I don't know if that was constitutional. I don't think it was it? So he just arrested them. But it's a war, so crazy things like that happen during a war. Well, let's read about this Battle of Bull Run again. When the Civil War broke out, the senior military officer in the U.S. Army was 73-year-old Winfield Scott. He was an old man, wasn't he, to be fighting in the Civil War. Scott, like William Sherman, believed it would take a long time to put down the rebellion. In early 1862, Scott came up with a plan to defeat the Confederacy. Since Scott's plan called for the North to strangle the South in much the same way that snakes strangle their prey, it was called the Anaconda Plan. The Anaconda Plan called for the U.S. Navy to blockade all southern ports while advancing down the Mississippi River. This would not only cut the Confederacy in two, but it would also prevent it from trading with other countries. Remember, the Confederacy, the southern states were trading with England, their cotton. England was giving them a lot of guns, so I guess this was a way to keep the guns from England to get to the South too. Under the Anaconda Plan, the Confederacy would be slowly starved into submission. However, a lot of people in the North made fun of the Anaconda Plan. They thought it would be easier to put down the rebellion than Scott said it would. In May, the Confederate government moved its capital to Richmond, Virginia. Since the 3-month enlistment of the Union soldiers were about to run out, newspapers called on Lincoln to send the Union Army south. "Forward to Richmond! The rebel Congress must not be allowed to meet there on the 20th of July, one newspaper said. Many people believed that the Union Army could march to Richmond, arrest the Confederate Congress, and the rebellion would be over. Union General Irwin McDowell didn't think his troops were ready to fight and told Lincoln this. "You are green, it is true, but they are green also," Lincoln told him. McDowell and his 35,000-man army were heading toward Richmond on July 21st when they ran into about 30,000 Confederate troops dug in behind a creek called Bull Run. At first, the Union troops appeared to be driving the Confederates back. "We fired a volley and saw the rebels running," one Union soldier said. "The boys were saying constantly with great glee, 'We whipped them. We'll hang Jeff Davis to a sour apple tree. They're running and the war's over.'" But after retreating for hours, Confederate soldiers made a stand. They were inspired by a general named Thomas Jackson, who, in spite of all the chaos around him, stood there like a stone wall. He became known as Stonewall Jackson after that. So all the men were running away, and he stood and faced the enemy like a stone wall. It was about that time that thousands more Southern soldiers were brought in to join the fighting. As Confederates fought back, they sent the inexperienced Union soldiers running away in panic. As the soldiers ran, they ran into sightseers who'd come from Washington, D.C. in carriages, intending to watch the battles and have a picnic lunch. Retreating soldiers and sightseers would straggle back to Washington, D.C. for hours that night. Bull Run was a humiliating defeat for the U.S. Army and a sign that the Civil War would be worse than most people realized. This painting here shows Union troops running during the Battle of Bull Run. They're running away from the battle because the Confederates are beating them. They had the Confederates on the run, but with the inspiration of Stonewall Jackson, the Confederates began fighting back, and they beat the U.S. Army this time. Another major battle. Lots of battles in this war, lots of changes, like I've said before, and who's winning. Well, you've got 10 questions about this text today to help you understand it better. So go and read this text again if you need to. Find the answers in the text, answer those 10 questions, and we'll see you with more Civil War stories tomorrow.